Well, thank you so much for having me, OpenUK. Came all the way from Oakland, California, Bay Area. There we go. Go Warriors. So I'm going to talk about unconventional OSS metrics. And I've been actually pretty passionate about this for a while in my career. So I'm a career changer. I got a finance degree, did sales in IT for 4 years, got an MBA, and then learned how to code while getting my MBA to eventually leave that career and then work at startups as an engineer. So that's my background. And I am only here because of open source. I wanted to build an app, and I Googled how to build an app, and Ruby on Rails came up. And well, a couple of things came up, but Ruby on Rails seemed the easiest. So I'm like, okay, cool, Rails new. And that's how I got started. And then the guides were open source. All the gems, Ruby gems were open source, and folks responded to stuff to me. So yeah, that's why I'm here, and that's why I stayed here in the open source world. So the question was like, what's success in open source? It's a very weighted question. It's tons of answers. My success is a series of stupid questions that got answered. Like that's pretty much how I got here. Like I opened an issue, sent an email, and someone responded, and then it kept happening. And then people would ask me questions, and then I'd return the favors. And I think, honestly, if we get anything else from this talk or from this conference, it's about participation and showing up. And sometimes folks don't know what to do, and like having 90 days of DevOps to know how to show up this every day and be consistent, I think that's how most folks really get brought in this community. This is actually a screenshot of my Gmail from 2015. This is actually my first contribution to open source. It was email. So 2015, I had a couple years of a GitHub account. I had worked at a company that didn't use GitHub issues, so I didn't know how to use issues on GitHub. So I was trying to build something and found a GitHub project that also had an NPM package. I learned Ruby. I didn't know Node. Node was like still kind of new for me, and kept getting all these errors. So on GitHub, I saw someone's email that created the repo, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna just email this person and ask the question of like, hey, I've got this error message, like, can you help me? And to my surprise, they responded like on a Friday evening. It was like Saturday early in the twilights. And I got unblocked by Sunday, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. People care enough to respond. It was like a Hail Mary. It was like Friday night, thought, best thing I could do is just ask somebody else to like unblock me. So it turns out they unblocked me, and the reason why they were responding so quickly is because they were in Thailand at a K-pop concert. And at the time, I had no idea what K-pop was. I didn't know what digital nomad was, but apparently this person that did open source this had all the time in the world. And I was forever grateful, and I learned Node.js and learned JavaScript from this interaction. So this talk, this is basically the metrics. I wanted to put this up front in case folks are like, okay, why is this guy talking so much? So these are the metrics that I wanted to break down. And these are things that we've been actually working at open source for the past 6 months. John's sitting over here. He's helped build a lot of my ideas into actual infrastructure and databases. So super happy that I can share this stuff. So new contributors. I used to be a new contributor, and there's a Gucci Mane quote. Gucci Mane is a trap artist. I know you have like Trill rap and beats here. Trap is like mumble rap from the Dirty South in Atlanta. He's the guy who basically got it popular. And he had this quote from an interview, which if you don't got sauce, then you lost. And I thought that'd be a perfect name for a company. So open sauce. So, and what we're really trying to do is like, the goal is always to have an opportunity to like show people the secret sauce, which is don't email maintainers, open an issue. That's the secret sauce. I'm the chief sauce officer. And we actually got this cool little, thanks to dub.co, we have a domain, oss.fyi. And you can find my contact information there. And I used to work at GitHub as well. I spent almost 5 years at GitHub. We're on the DevRel team, so joined right before a Microsoft acquisition. First, like, inception of GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions was a whole other product, and the thing that came out of that was GitHub Actions. And so I joined at that point. So a lot of the stuff on the internet around my GitHub career is around actions. So the 90 days of DevOps, definitely stuff that was on my radar, and I love to see that you're still going further along in this year. So disclaimer, I'm not a data scientist. No metric can be looked in isolation, and I would say also certain metrics don't matter for certain projects. So I'm going to show metrics for projects that are all different, and some are going to look bad. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they just don't matter for that project. Oh, and these are not answers, these are just ideas. But if you want to provide a scientific research grant to me, I would totally make these official. So the question I wanted to ask, again, for these unconventional metrics is what's success? And the quick answer is not stars. This is something that came up a lot. I used to get this question all the time when I was at GitHub. People would ask me, hey, how do I make my project popular? How do I become famous? And actually, I worked in the GraphQL space, and I've actually never said this publicly, but I always obscure it, but I don't work at GitHub anymore. howtographql.com, it was powered by a company, and when you go to the course and you authenticate, it would actually star the repo for you. So if you really want a lot of stars, do that. Don't do that. Please don't do that. But that was a lot of folks did that 10 years ago, and until people got wind of that. So please rate this talk 5 stars. I'm just kidding. I literally told you stars don't matter, but still 5 stars, please. So if stars didn't matter, jQuery would be top 150 projects of all GitHub. But does anybody know when the last jQuery release happened? Oh. Yeah, I mean, they have maintenance stuff, and there's new versions, but still, last time I shipped jQuery to production was 2017-ish. Not that I'm the metric for where jQuery is doing well, but I do know that that project is on maintenance mode, and there's 1.5 persons on the maintaining that. Also, one cool thing to kind of think about is if you have over 1,000 stars, you're in the top 10% of all of GitHub. So it's like a diminishing returns. If you put any more effort at just trying to get stars, you're already on the list. Focus on different metrics, like new contributors. Runa Capital, thank you so much. They have their ROS index. Measuring stars per week per day is actually pretty interesting if you look at that granular, because then you start seeing some really interesting signals of oh, okay, a project had a moment. What was that moment? And the moments are the things that we should really be talking about, not how many moments happened, but there's if you want to be famous or get tons of stars, there's some clear things you can do to do that, and most people do it over and over again. I'll talk about that as well. But check out the ROS index. You can find more context on this as well. So JJ, he leads OSS Capital. He's made a lot of investments in open source projects, a lot of projects that we probably wouldn't even heard of. Years later, they're now funded by a VC arm, and we get the benefit. Cal.com is something that I just signed up for recently. Beautiful product. It's evolved so much in the last couple of years, and it's thanks to having some proper business model and some proper infrastructure on it. But what I wanted to point out is that JJ tweeted this out a few months ago, and metrics that he even pays attention to. And I just want to point out, even the person investing in projects, stars is the lowest on the totem pole. There's so many other things that you have to look in as a whole to understand if a project's doing well, good, investable, and then you got to ask a bunch of other questions like business model and if the co-founders are going to break up in 6 months. You got to ask that question. So Godot is actually an OSS Capital project, and there's it's kind of dark, but you can kind of see the yellow line. All the way on the right, they had a moment, September 12th of last year. So Godot is an open source game engine. And does anyone want to take a guess of what happened September 12th in 2023? Yeah, I heard it. Unity. Unity announced pricing changes for developers. So Godot announced received the investment capital. They announced guides on how you can convert from Unity to Godot. And they had a moment. They got about 6,000 stars in just one day, 15,000 within the week. And it's a moment that you can capitalize on and drive some engagement to hopefully contribution or folks building on their platform. So that was an interesting moment. And this is actually data that we're getting from GitHub events feed. So very similar to Runa Capital and what they're doing with the archive. This is Grafana as well. So this is not a product that we're looking at. This is basically us just looking at the data and putting it in a place that's visualized in Grafana. So I've got a couple more slides on the whole star thing, but stars is marketing. And I think once we think about the stars used to not be marketing, stars used to be bookmarking for later. And you could still use that as a feature on GitHub, but in reality, growth hackers have figured out what stars are, and it's not gonna stop. So like once we all agree, okay, it's a really good way to get some awareness, to have a strategy around your open source, to like scale up marketing stars. So I told you one really shady way to get more stars. There's a couple other better ways to do it. And yeah, let's move on. Oh, sorry, not move on. Stars also equal VC money. And speaking of which, Zed, basically they announced their open source, their project. Zed is, it's an IDE built in Rust. It's literally the team that built the defunct Atom IDE at GitHub. They've left and then since now built Zed. They've been working on this for a long time and it's a private repo. They picked the day, they open sourced it, they told all of the friends, it was in the X-Hubber chat, and we all started. And it was a good marketing event, now they're off to the races, and I hope they do very well. And it looks like a correction, it's actually, that's the line of the stars going up on the single day they open sourced. Maybe is, they just recently rewrote their entire Next app into Rails last week. The founder is actually not Canadian, but they have a double hockey stick going on here. This is an event that they publicly shed, hey, we got finance, or sorry, we got investment. Check out our project. We're now switching to another framework. And it was a moment. It was a moment they got to capture. And I think the one thing I just want to point out when I talk about stars is that a lot of these moments are forgotten years later. And I had the benefit of working at GitHub for 5 years. So like a lot of the moments I have up in my head, and I'll share one that most people probably aren't aware of. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that open source will lean into sharing these moments later. So stars don't convert into success. Makeplane is another example of this. Makeplane also took funding as well last year. And they did something very different, which is they tweeted out this star history graph, but then they blurred out their competitors and then claimed that they were the #1 open source Jira platform, which I was surprised. I didn't know a lot of people like Jira, but apparently they do. They star it. But what I'm getting at is like, again, growth hackers had figured out that stars mattered the most, and that's what you sort of convert in doing marketing. So it's better than getting AdWords in the open source space. I don't recommend doing stuff like this, like sort of like, I don't know, punching down or up. It doesn't feel well. But what we found out when looking at the data from Makeplane is that these stars were all legitimate. The stars came through Hacker News. They had some good marketing events, and they converted that into some engagement in their platform. This is, on the left is a star chart per day. And I think actually looking at this per day gives you a better understanding of what's happening in the project as opposed to cumulative. Going back to jQuery, jQuery is 57,000 stars. But they're 57,000 stars over 10 plus years. Well, more than that, but on the right is commit. So again, the chart's like hard to read, but understand this is the shape of the graph. These are commits per day, and they don't actually correlate. So what I'm getting at is like you don't get contribution from stars. You get marketing events from stars. So when you look at forks, what's really interesting is the correlation between forks and stars. So if you have a great star day, you also have a great fork day. And then what's interesting is you can actually start correlating forks to actual contribution. So it's very hard to get more than 100 forks on a day. I say it's very hard. I haven't seen it yet. I've looked at a lot of projects and I haven't seen more than 100 forks. So like that's kind of like the ceiling. I say it out loud, and then we're going to have some growth hacker be like, hey, fork our repo, fork us, which sounds awful. New contributors correlate the forks. And the one thing that I was going to point out is something that we looked at when people still work at GitHub. When I was at GitHub, new contributors was a metric I was always looking for. Because that was a thing that was signal for me to go reach out to the maintainer and become best friends, send them stickers, invite them to the conference, because there's some sort of energy happening in that project that GitHub wanted to be a part of. And not that we had any sort of financial gain, it's just the goal, like, let's just be real, we need everyone to stay on GitHub. So if like the most popular projects on GitHub having a great time, we send them all cool swag, like they'll stick around. So like that was a signal as someone who did DevRel, look for new contributors. And we did this actually with Astro. So Astro is a front-end website builder. And in 2021, Q1, #1 project for new contributors. And at that time, we were looking for season 2 of our podcast, called the README podcast, for guests. And there was a story that we were trying to build through the course of 6 episodes. And one was like growth of community and like what works well, what's the secret sauce? So we reached out to Fred, had him on the podcast, and like, hey, did you know that you were the #1 project for new contributors? Of course he didn't, because that's not information that GitHub shares publicly, and there's no database of sources other than the GitHub archive. So I spent a lot of time on new contributors. The next 3 actually go pretty fast. Rate of self-selection is something that in statistics, so I got a C in statistics in college, but I bet you I got an A right now because I spent a lot of time doing stats. This is outside contribution. So a lot of understanding of, like we have Hacktoberfest, you've got like a lot of really good first contribution events, but then everyone tries to contribute to a project you can't contribute to, and it's not very clear why. And if you can ask the question, can I even contribute here? Like, did they take outside contribution? It's kind of interesting to like kind of make a better judgment on like whether the project is truly the source open, available, or taking contributions. And like sorry, I'm gonna preempt myself in this slide, but non sequitur, I'm gonna switch to the next slide, I'm going on a tangent. So this is open source. Open source, you can actually add a bunch of repos into one dashboard. And so if you go to oss.fyi/AI grant, Nat Friedman, former CEO of GitHub, is doing grants for AI projects. And I just was curious, like what AI projects were open source. So he's done 60 of these investments. I picked about 12 of them that actually had an open source proper experience. Some of them are open source with like just a README, but 12 of them actually were open source, had code actively contributing. I put them into this list. Sorry, I said 12, it's actually 19. I just looked at the number. And then I picked the most 3 popular and I wrote a blog post about it. One of them I wasn't even aware of, and I'll just say the name because it's kind of small down there, Rowie, which is like open source Excel meets your database. So it's like a Firebase experience, but you get Excel interface. So for low code for database people. Sorry, low code for business people, basically. From left to right, this tells you that there's medium activity, so it's on average of activity. 11 PRs are currently open. Of the PRs that got merged in the last 30 days, and this is context you can kind of hover and get tooltips on in open source, but 63% of them get merged in 2 days. Which is really, really eye-opening. I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty good for a company I hadn't heard of or a project I hadn't heard of. And then when I dig into the data, I actually saw that like 90% of all contributions happen from 2 people, and those are the 2 founders and maintainers of the project. So the question is like, can I make a contribution? Probably. Like they probably have a lot of bandwidth to like take my contribution. Are people making contributions outside of them? Not currently. And this is not good or bad. Like this is just an observation, so people can make a judgment if they can contribute or can't contribute, or if they want to contribute. So rate of self-selection is basically just taking contributions that come outside the organization and apply a percentage to that. So I did that. Oh, sorry. Before I jump into that, I was going to kill my punchline. Can anybody name a successful open source project with 0 outside contribution? There's no wrong answer. I'm just curious. Android? Yeah. Probably mostly Google working on that. I got one. It's called TypeScript. Anybody ever heard of TypeScript? TypeScript is like kind of engulfed the entire JavaScript ecosystem. And 0, big fat goose egg, outside contributions of Microsoft. Is that mind-blowing? So fascinating stuff. So, and this is actually, sorry, this is just for Q4 of last year. So like we can go way back and be like, oh yeah, we got some contributions other places last year. But I thought that was really fascinating because there are certain projects that are, and again, this is not good or bad, like TypeScript, great project, has tons of contributions day over day. But if I'm gonna make a contribution to a project, it's probably not gonna be TypeScript. Oh, and sorry, this is, again, this is data that we haven't exposed on a platform yet. We've been working on this for like the past like 4 or 5 months. This will actually be surfaced on the platform hopefully pretty soon. So I've kind of taken like a stars to PR journey, and I'm going from stars to forks to identify, okay, there's a signal here, forks to new contributors, and we'll continue to work on this little path right here. So engagement. So engagement, you can think of engagement within open source through like commits. I do understand that like commits is not the only way to contribute to open source, and I'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to see the shape of the data for like the projects that I was most interested in the last few years. So going back to roughly 2015, thanks to VS Code. You can see VS Code is like the orange on top. That's pretty much the lion's share of all commits happening. It's also a Microsoft-backed project. I don't have a slide for this, but #1 new contributor project of 2023 is VS Code. And The reason for that is extensions. The fact that you can extend the platform is a beautiful experience for most folks contributing, especially for the first time. But I've got like Hugging Face, Next.js, Astro I mentioned, Bun, very popular new runtime in Node.js, and then Fig, which just got acquired by AWS, had a very short-lived open source journey, a couple years, and then got acquired. But they do have a bit of a blip and had a huge like star chart growth as well. But this is really just looking at the shape of the data to understand like, hey, is there's activity happening? Because a lot of times you want to like know, is this another jQuery? Like, is this thing like a complete open source project, or is this like an opportunity for me to make a decision about what I'm going to use, what I'm going to contribute to, but also like on an OSPO side, what's tech debt? What needs to be sunset? And a lot of times companies I've talked to in the last few weeks actually, they have a lot of projects they don't even know what the status is. So the better way to look at this is like all events happening on GitHub. So that's what this is combining stars, comments, issues, forks as well, into one graph. So all the projects you saw before, these are all the events. And you kind of see like these little like cat ears of 2 events that happen that are 2 really good days for maybe one project, maybe 2 projects. I'll tell you, it was one project, had 2 amazing days, and it was also marketing events. So they were funded by Kleiner Perkins back in July of 2022, or they announced it then. And then, sorry, Oven is Bun's parent company, and then they announced their 1.0 in September, and the lion's share of all their energy and attention all happened in those just 2 days. So what I'm getting at is, again, growth hackers, VCs, marketers have figured out what stars are, and these events all correlate to now everyone has a marketing event, an announcement of funding, and that's how they've basically been owning the star game. When I joined GitHub, I think Vue.js was the most popular project at 80-something stars. Now Vue.js is like in the 300,000s. Free Code Camp is like 340,000. React is like, it's just like completely inflated. And the only reason that's inflated is because GitHub has done a really good job of international expansion. So now Southeast Asia, Singapore's, Brazil's number 4 for open source. India will overlap US by 2030 for open source contribution. So all these new markets are now being taught stars is the way to go. So like there's an opportunity for us in open source to participate different, help to educate folks that there's other ways to be successful in open source. Engagement, this is the sort of algorithm calculation. Here it is. It's only $1 million. You know, take a picture and then send the check. But PR commits plus comments divided by unique contributors, really good way to see if there's some engagement. This is going back to, and I'm just gonna speed up this a little bit, going back to looking at engagement for projects that I was interested in looking into. Kubernetes is only on the top. So doing the calculation, unique contributors based on issues and comments and commits, it's in the 400, which is a bit of an anomaly. Most projects don't reach that. I've looked at a lot of projects, so most projects don't hit that number. It's just that they have really good governance. It's got a really good infrastructure, got SIG groups, so it's a little bit different on how it operates. But then when you look at like Tiger Beetle is like finance database software. They're very niche. They're written in Zig. So when you look at that at 0.28, it's not a bad thing. It's just it's a new thing. But then you look at Vue.js at a 30. So 30 unique commenters, contributors. And again, this is like looking at just the broad strokes. Again, and just ideas that we're going to eventually put into our product pretty soon. I've been actually talking to a lot of these founders and representations of these projects over the past like year and a half on this podcast called The Secret Sauce. We literally asked, what's the secret sauce? Like, how did you get successful? What was it? What was that moment? And I got that moment from Brendan Burns, who's now at Microsoft, co-creator of Kubernetes. And they said that the things that we're tracking was issues was interest, PRs was adoption. So if you could see issues growing, but also growing from outsiders of Google, then there's a signal that someone cares about this and not a Google, because they had to get buy-in. And Google had to be convinced, yeah, we should probably do something with this thing. It's working. And then PRs were a signal of, hey, people want this in their situation. So the first huge adoption curve was Red Hat. When Red Hat started participating in Kubernetes, it took off. And it was like a signal for the rest of the community to basically say, hey, we should pay attention to Kubernetes. So there's a full episode on YouTube. You should check it out and get the full journey there. So stars, the PRs, New contributors is the pathway to find out if there's a signal for success, really signal for engagement, because then if you just want to know if this thing's like green or red, there you go. And then finally, I want to talk about contributor confidence. Yeah, I got a few minutes. So if you want to find me for questions, you just find me outside upstairs probably. But actually, the next talk's gonna be really good, so you should stick for that. Find me later. Contributor confidence, so this is something that, like, look at the shape of the data, same projects I showed before, but looking for unique contributor confidence, and the confidence itself is repeat contributions to a notable project. So I showed you how to find how notable projects work through activity and engagement. Finding folks who can contribute twice, hardest thing to do is contribute a second time. So if there's a signal of a second contribution and it's a notable project that has high confidence and have done this other places, you can start really painting the picture of, hey, there's a signal. High confident contributors are now consistently contributing at this place. And I think, again, like going back to 90 Days of DevOps, like if I am a cloud company or a cloud project and I put my project in front of folks who then can contribute back upstream to where all my code is, like then I can start onboarding more confident contributors, because I think the good first issue thing is good and it exists. But I think there's like another second good first issue, like movement that needs to happen. So confidence, again, I explained this, but yeah, contribute more than just one time. So that's kind of the summarizing, then winding down that as well, and how we get to success, repeat, confident, and outside contribution. I've got some other stuff I could show, charts and graphs. So we have a feature called contributor list. You can put a bunch of contributors. You can sync your GitHub team then to see where the shape of the contributions are looking. So new folks are alumni, so people don't come back for the contributions, they leave. We have a URL called pizza.new. So if you wanted to link, create one dashboard for yourself, pizza.new, sync your organization, you're good. If you don't want to sign up for something, we have a CLI called Pizza. It's hosted on Homebrew currently, so sorry, not Windows compatible, but Mac only. And then we also have it on NPM, so that's the command. Slides will go up on Sketch. And then the other thing, all the stuff I showed before, coming soon. We've been working with some companies that might be on this slide about showing these things in a chart that makes sense. And also, if you don't want to even do all that sort of GUI stuff, we have an API. So if you don't like documentation and you want to figure it out yourself, we do have an API. And I'm serious, like documentation is not there yet. And then I'm B. Dougie, find me, and please stay for the next talk.